There's a lot of really good stuff in this portion, isn't there? You know, it's the word never ceases to amaze, and there's a lot of things that we continually find in it. And man, what do we talk about? What do we not talk about? What do we do? What do we get into? That's always the task at hand when we approach these things. But that's why we study it every year, guys. That way, you know, there's always something there that the Father wants to reveal for where we're at. That's because the Word is alive. It's because it's giving us what we need when we need it. And so we're hearing and we're changing, and as we're changing, we're seeing things that we may not have seen before. So the Word equips you, but it also challenges you. See? Because the Word doesn't change. And Yahweh doesn't change. Which means we have to. And He will equip us and to draw us near to Him, to be like Him. So there's a lot of things we could talk about in this parsha. I mean, we could talk about the 2 tablets. A lot of people don't stop to think about there were actually 2 sets of tablets for the 10 Commandments, the 10 words. Literally in the Hebrew, it's the 10 words. So they don't stop to think that there were 2 separate sets of tablets that were given and the differences between them. We're not going to really go in depth with that today because we've covered that prior years, okay? The good thing about this is we do have some videos up that you can find and watch so that you can cover some of the things that we may not get to tonight. What about the 13 attributes of Yahweh? You know, when he passes before Moshe and he proclaims 13 attributes before him, that reveals the heart of the Father. What about Moses making intercession for his people? Moses making intercession, asking for forgiveness. And we see how one man does make a difference in the life of the nation. What about grace on the mountain? Moses is saying, if we found grace in your sight, then don't let us go without you. Guess what? He went with them, which meant he did extend grace to them. See, if we look in the Word, we find things that have always been there, but we may not have seen it before. What about the golden calf? Well, that's a big one, isn't it? The golden calf. And the thing with the golden calf, it's not that the people were setting up a golden calf as a replacement for Yahweh. They weren't. They were setting up their idea of who He was and calling it Yahweh. And there's a difference. What about the test for the unfaithful bride as a result of that? Moses gave Israel the test for the unfaithful bride. And many people fell that day. So there's a lot in here that we could get into and cover, but I'm not going to talk about any of those tonight. I know, teaser, right? We're going to talk about a few other things. We are going to talk about atonement. We are going to talk about washing and the Father drawing us near to Him. Okay? And we're going to see these things as realized from the beginning to the end, because God is changeless and He is limitless. Just because we're seeing things that we may not have seen before doesn't mean God changed. It means He's revealing something to us that we may not have had before. And so we thank Him that He's revealing His heart to us and that we are changing. Right? So we start the name of this parsha, Ki Tisa. Ki Tisa literally means when you elevate. The word Tisa is from the word nasa. Think about that for a second. N-A-S-A. Nasa. Which means to elevate. Have you made a connection yet? NASA? What's the big deal with NASA? What did they do? To go up. I wonder if they had any Hebrew speakers and they were trying to form the name of what they were trying to do, you know. I don't know. I'm just, saying, just stuff to think about. But the parsha starts, Ki Tisa et Rosh b'nei Israel. So Ki Tisa is when you elevate b'nei, the sons, et Rosh. Et Rosh, the Aleph Taf, heads. So when you lift up the heads of the sons of Israel. Now, this doesn't mean off with their head kind of a thing, okay? Lift up their heads, that's not what it's talking about. In the process of what's about to happen, the children of Israel are being elevated to a place they had not been before. And we find some things that the Father is extending towards his people that they may not have realized before. Okay, so when we get into this, let's start. Exodus 30, verses 11 through 16. We start with verse 11 and 12. Yahweh said to Moshe, when you take a census, see that? When you take a census, but in the Hebrew, it's when you lift up the heads. So, did they just go through and did they count the people? That wasn't the way God wanted it done. You didn't count the people, but there was a means for counting. We'll get to that. So when you take a census of the people of Israel, each shall give a what? Ransom for his life for the Lord when you number them, so there will be no plague among them when you number them. So what he's saying is when you got this, when you're elevated, when you're part of this census, when you're part of this counting, there had to be something that was given that would be considered a ransom. Why would they use this word ransom? This word is kafar in the Hebrew. Kafar is what we're looking for in the Hebrew. It's where we get the word kofer, right? And there's a few things in relationship to this. The word kafar is where we get the word atonement. You know, the word, I don't know if I should get into this. The word atonement is a made-up word. Okay? It was created because in Hebrew it is kafar. And it literally means to cover. Okay? Atonement doesn't necessarily mean forgive and wipe away. Atonement means something is covered for protection and for safety. Let me give you another example. Noah made an ark. You know? How many of you guys singing the song? The Lord said to Noah... No, never mind. I'm sure. And he covered the wood with what? Pitch. That's this word. The word that's translated as pitch is kafar. And it placed a cover over the wood that allowed the judgment to remain outside the boat. When Moses was put in a little basket, which by the way, that word is ark. When he was put in this basket, they covered it with pitch. Same thing. So it was a protection from the judgment of the Nile. You know, that Pharaoh pronounced. Funny, throw all the children into the Nile. Well, she did it. But he was in an ark. You get caught on a technicality, right? So, these are the things that we're looking at. We need to understand that forgiveness is an aspect that comes with atonement, right? But atonement we need to expand the way we look at it. Because atonement doesn't just mean forgive, it means cover. Even in the Paleo Hebrew, where we find like the Day of Atonements, literally it's plural, atonements, okay? Even if in the Paleo Hebrew, the word kafar means to take the palm of the hand, place it on the head, and to speak. To provide a protection, to provide a cover. And so there's more to this than we generally think. Again, atonement was given to stop the plague that would result because of the census. Atonement is also a ritual covering, and it's, like we said, as for protection. Okay? Atonement was given as a protection. We find who this specifically was given to. Who was this for? For those of you who had the opportunity to have Reuben here, to see him when he was here a few weeks back from begadivri.com, it was amazing. He talked about the half shekel. He talked about the atonement. He talked about this was mainly given like a soldier's commandment because of what happens here. At the age of 20, what happens to the Israelis? They serve in the IDF. Guys, you know, it's been that way for a very long time. So when they went in, there was some things that had to happen here. First off, they still had to play their role and play their part in their connection to the tabernacle. And this is one way they could do that. How do you stop the plague in the midst of the people? To have God in your midst and to have him cover or protect you from the things that are outside. And so we look at this. ages 20 and up, in Numbers 10:9, it says, "And if you go to war in your land against the enemy that oppresses you, then you shall blow an alarm with the silver trumpets." Not just the ram's horns, but the silver trumpets that were made. It says, "And you shall be" what? "Remembered before the Lord your God, and you shall be safe from your enemies." Here's the thing. The word remember doesn't mean he forgot you. The word remember in Hebrew simply means to act on behalf of. When we say that we do something as a remembrance, it means we are doing this so we don't forget. So we're doing something on behalf of something or someone. Deuteronomy 20, verse 4. "For Yahweh your God is he that goes with you to fight for you against your enemies and to save you." Exodus 30, verse 13. "So each one who was numbered in the census shall give this, half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary." The shekel is 20 gerahs. "Half a shekel as an offering to Yahweh. Everyone who was numbered of the census from 20 years old and upward shall give Yahweh's offering. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half a shekel when you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives." Now, the thing that we need to look at this is say, okay, so they still use shekels in Israel, right? So just for the sake of argument, let's say there's 4 shekels to $1. To the American dollar, 4 shekels. So that would make each shekel roughly around a quarter, and half a shekel would be 12.5 cents. Well, shoot, I could give 12.5 cents. The problem with that is this was not a monetary issue. It was a weight issue. Shekel was a weight, not a dollar bill. Okay? And half of a shekel today would go for about $21. So that's roughly what half of a shekel of silver would weigh, and it would be its value and its worth right now. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about this is that everyone who was numbered in the census was to give this, and listen to this, at age 20 and up, no one could give more, no one could give less. No one was allowed to add to it, no one was allowed to take away from it. Let me give you this idea. Your atonement's the same no matter who you are. You're not like, oh, well, he's a good person, so he only needs a little atonement. Or, man, that guy's bad. He needs to go, like, rob a bank. It's not the way it works. Atonement was the same for every person involved. All right? And so this was, again, like I said, their part of having a role to play in things, because silver had a representation when it comes to Scripture, and it comes to the things the Father tells us about. All right? So, silver represents atonement. The silver they collected was used to make the sockets and the rings for the tabernacle. Now that's interesting. The silver that they gathered was used to help hold things together. You see that? And what happens when atonement is given for us? It helps hold us together. All the pieces represent the people together as one, together as a whole. And we need to learn to see that. The story behind the half shekel? Well, let's get to that in a minute. 16. "You shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord so as to make atonement for your lives." The idea behind all of this is to be remembered before the Lord your God, and that he will work on your behalf. And it's also for you, so that when you come and you approach, you see your part to play in all of this before you. More about the half shekel. It was used in the service for the Mishkan. No one could give more or less. Do not add, do not take away. Nobody is better than anybody else. Nobody is worse than anybody else. We are all a half. The problem is when we start looking at each other as I am better than you, or I wish I was as good as you. The problem is when we start looking at each other like that. But if we get on the level where we can understand we are all the same before the Lord our God, then we don't have the room to look down on anyone. Amen. We are all in the need of the same things. We are all in the need of Him and the atonement that He provides. And so we need to learn that when we're whole, is to be one with Him and to be one with each other. So we need to come together with purpose. Whose purpose? His purpose, the kingdom. And let our half be made to a whole. Why? That it may be a memorial to the children of Israel before the Lord to make an atonement for your souls. Now again, this is what we talked about earlier. Here's the Hebrew for it. That it may be a memorial is the word zikron. So it is a memorial before the sons of Israel. Okay? And it was used for the service of the Mishkan and worship, and it was before Yahweh. So when he looks out at his people, he sees the atonement that he was given towards them. When they go to battle, and the likelihood of going to battle, they're going to shed blood. They need to be able to come home with a clear conscience and be able to say, the Lord our God, He is the one who fights for us. And He is the one that cleanses me and makes me whole. And He is the one that provides atonement for me. It's good to know, right? So moving, Exodus 34:23. 3 times in a year shall all your men, children, appear before the Lord your God, the God of Israel. When is that? Again, this is Zachor, one who is remembered. We do this as a memorial. Okay? So the idea behind this is alluding to the ones that have been atoned for. The ones that have been atoned for are to appear before the Lord at the 3 foot festivals, Shalosh Regalim. What are the 3 foot festivals? Pesach, Shavuot, Tabernacles. Because Pesach, we were talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay? And then Shavuot, what we call Pentecost. You know Pentecost happened before Acts 2, right? Okay? That was a repeat. And I could even show you where. So, all of this is things that are alluding to the Father and the things that He desires for us, so that He will remember us. Why? Because we remember Him. He said, this is my word towards you, this is a path of life, this is a path of blessing, walk in it. And when we walk in it, we honor Him. And so He says that He will remember us. Again, we come before Yahweh to worship. So we're moving on towards the laver of bronze. Because when you enter in through the tent, you have the altar that was there, the brazen altar where the offerings were put. And then the next thing you look at is the laver. That's where they washed. It was made of bronze. The interesting thing about bronze is that it's a germicidal and it's an antimicrobial. And so they would come and they would make the offerings before the Lord, right? And of course, when they put these offerings on there, there's going to be blood involved. And so what do they need to do before they can go towards the tent? They need to wash. Where do they wash? At the laver. And they wash their hands and they wash their feet so that they can continue to approach. Okay? Getting into that. The idea behind this is that we look and examine our walking and our doing. Psalm says, who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who shall stand in His holy place? He that has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken my name in vain and has not sworn deceitfully. He shall receive a blessing from Yahweh and righteousness from the God of his salvation. So the idea behind clean hands doesn't just mean you just wash your hands and you're good. It's not just a physical act that's done. It's representative of a mikvah, what we call a baptism. It's a washing, so it's a change of status, a change of what we're representing. The idea behind having clean hands is that the work of our hands are clean before the Lord. The things that we do, which is an overflow of our heart, that these things are clean before the Most High. James 4:7-8 says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil and he will flee from you. You know, we often forget that first part. You know, resist the devil and he will flee. So we think we're going to go toe-to-toe with the adversary and without being submitted to Yahweh. And you're going to get beat up. Because our submission to Yahweh is how we resist the devil. So submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, sinners, and purify your hearts, double-minded. Why would he say cleanse your hands? Because the hands and the heart go together. Because the hands is what the working of the heart. You fashion it in your heart, then you do it. Right? So the things that we do need to be clean before the Lord as well. Verse 17, Exodus 30. So Yahweh said to Moshe, you shall also make a basin of bronze with its stand of bronze for washing. You shall put it between the tent of meeting and the altar, and you shall put water in it, with which Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and feet. Verse 20. When they go into the tent of meeting, or when they come near the altar to minister, to burn a food offering to the Lord, they shall wash with water so that they may not die. I think that's pretty important, don't you? Again, we need to understand that holy has boundaries. Holy has responsibilities. And if you are a holy people, then there are things he is asking us to do. See, it's not that you do to become holy, because that just doesn't work. But he said, because I have made you a holy people. He says, you are to be holy because I am holy. I am Yahweh your God. So he makes us holy. And then he tells us how to walk in a way that's undefiled. And so he says, so if you bring the offering, you get the blood on there, then you have to wash so that you don't come that way before the Lord your God. It says, they shall wash their hands and their feet so that they may not die. And it shall be a statute forever to them, even to him and to his offspring throughout their generations. So what we find here is the laver was between the altar and the tabernacle. And this was to be a reminder for the people that they need cleansing to approach God. We have to be cleansed to approach him. Now here's the thing. We say, no, we need forgiveness to approach him. Guys, you're missing the point. Forgiveness was before you could even go through the door of the tabernacle. Even before the offering was brought, forgiveness needed to be extended before that. So because forgiveness, we now can come to the door, and then the offering is brought, then the wash, then his dwelling. Okay? So the priests brought the korbanot. The korbanot is what we call the offerings or the sacrifices. Korban literally means something brought near. It is something that is brought close to Yahweh. So they bring their korbanot at the altar, but they wash their hands and feet at the laver before they could serve in the holy place. Guys, we are atoned for and brought near in the Messiah. He is our korban. But then we are washed by the word so that we can serve and minister before him. Do you see how that works? Like when he brought them out of Egypt, he says, I have redeemed them by bringing them out, by delivering them and bringing them out. This was an act of redemption. And then he brought them through the water. Then he brought them to his word. See, we forget, redemption did come first. Something else about it. It was not just brass, it was polished brass. It was like a mirror. So that when they went to go wash, they had to wash their hands, they lean over it and they look down, and what do they see? Themselves. In other words, when they come to wash, they need to inspect themselves. They need to look at themselves. They need to look within. They need to look at their heart and to see where it was. It's interesting that it says that what was also used for this basin of bronze was made from the mirrors of the women. Now, mirrors is not something that you just had an abundance of. So, ladies, how willing would you be to give up your mirrors? You only have one. You giving it? Hey, honey, how do I look? Oh, you look fine. You're going to trust that? See, what was more important? The vanity of the world or the holiness of your God? They wanted to be a part of this. They wanted to do that. And interesting when you look here, and it's one more thing in the Hebrew, it says, he made the basin of bronze and its stand of bronze from the mirrors of the ministering women who ministered at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The word there for ministering is the word tzavah, which is also where we get tzavaot. Where have we heard that? Like Yahweh tzavaot. It means an army. Now guys, if you get an army of women coming at you, you might want to consider their request. What was happening? They were coming And this is implying that there's more than just one or two or three. There was a group of people that were coming to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They were coming before the Lord their God, and they wanted to contribute however they could to this tabernacle. And the contribution they had would be looked at every day as the priest would go and would wash, and we'd have the cleansing that was there. You know, we're called to be Tzebaot before the Lord. He is he not the Lord of armies? And so we're called to be that. And so if we are, then where are we supposed to be? Gathered around the tabernacle. Looking toward the Father, looking toward His heart. The ministering women who ministered, more literally read, they came by troops. These are women who assembled themselves by troops at the door of the tent of meeting. Where else do we find this? Who else do we see this? What about Hannah? 1 Samuel 1, 9 through 12. She was praying, and she had herself down before the Lord, and she was beside herself. She was distraught, crying out for a child. Where was she? It said that Eli, the high priest, was sitting by the door of the tabernacle. He went up to her and said, "Are you drunk?" She said, no. Her heart was just in agony and pain. He said, well, the Lord will grant your request. Go in peace. And He did. But where was she? At the door of the tabernacle. Others we see in 1 Samuel 2:22, we find that others, there was women that was gathering at the door of the tent of meeting, and Eli's sons, who were wicked, were taking advantage of them. Let's leave it at that. Another interesting thing about the laver, it has no size dimensions. Isn't that interesting? Because in the tabernacle, everything was exact and specific. It has to be this by that. Everything that was made had specific measurements, specific weight, specific height, everything. And even down to where it says they had to bring every piece before Moses and say, is this what you saw? And he had to say, yep, or nope, try again. But the laver had no size dimensions. Guys, the laver represents the Word. The Word of Yahweh is limitless. You can always know the washing is there. The water is always there. It's the washing of the hands and the feet. And guys, this is another thing that's really awesome when you stop to think about it. Because here they go, they're at the altar and they have blood, and then they go to wash. Well, as they're washing with the water, what's mixing? The blood and the water are mixing together and washing. We find a picture of the blood and the Word being used in conjunction to each other. Where else do we see stuff like that? Get ready. Exodus 24:6. Moses took half of the blood, put it on the basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, and he read it in the audience of the people. And they said, all that Yahweh has said will we do and be obedient. Now that in itself is a miracle. The fact they had this many people together and they all spoke in one voice is something. And Moses took the blood, and he did what? What's the next word? Sprinkled it on the people. I want to make a note of something, and I'll get more to this in a minute. He did not take the basin and pour it over their heads. The blood was sprinkled. He sprinkled it on the people, and he said, behold, what? The blood of the covenant. So we have the blood of the covenant read with the book of the covenant, and he says these two go together. They go hand in hand. This is the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you concerning all these words I have just read to you. The blood and the word working together. Where else do we see the blood and the word together? We'll think about this for a minute. Before we go to John, talk about Yeshua's side being pierced and blood and water flowed. Where else? Pesach, Passover. They took hyssop and put the blood from the lamb and put it on the doorpost and the lintel. So that's the blood being there. So where does the word mix in there? All right. The doorpost. The Hebrew word for doorpost is mezuzah. Now, you familiar with that word? The word doorpost literally is mezuzah. It's not the box that we call a mezuzah. The doorpost itself literally is the mezuzah. But when we attach the box to it, we are attaching the word to the mezuzah, so it becomes a part of it. Okay? So the word, the mezuzah, and the blood are to be together on the doorpost. Why? So that when you go out of your home, you see that it is the Lord your God that goes before you, and that you are to walk in His ways out there. And when you come home, same thing. It's not your one way out there and it's different in here. Because we represent Him out there in the world, but we also represent Him in our homes. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, Shema Israel. Hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might. And these words that I am giving you today are to be where? On your heart. It says, you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit at your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you arise. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. We also see the same thing being given in Deuteronomy 11, 18 to 22. You are to write these things. These things that I command you today are the things that you are to be walking in and holding to the Lord your God. And it's a reminder of who we are and who He is. All right, what about Revelation? The blood and the water working together. All right, take a look at that. Revelation 12:11. And they overcame him by what? Blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved their lives not to death. Or they loved not their lives to death. The blood and the word working together. Revelation 19, 11 to 13. I saw heaven open, behold a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judged and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew himself, and he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word. The blood and the Word working together. So what we find in here, and throughout the Scripture, what we really look at, the washing was water. The sprinkling was blood. Bear with me and don't throw stones. I don't find any Scripture that says, wash me in your blood. I could be wrong, but I haven't found it. Something that we try to do, guys, remember, the Word is supposed to challenge you. The way that we have preconceived ideas as we come before the Word. Let's not form doctrine out of the way we fashion our golden calf to be. Wow, did I really just say that? Let's be careful in how we approach the things the Father is asking. Because the Father is revealing every day His heart to His people. We need to change. Look out and see the world. Look at the way the world is. And you can blame the world all you want, but it's our fault. We need to change. It's the only way that we're going to make a difference for the people of God to be the people of God. Amen. It says, cleanse me and make me clean. We find this all through the Scripture, but we find places where the blood has been applied, but we don't find places where they are washed in the blood. The wash is the water. And just for the sake of throwing it out there, guys, the washing in blood is pagan rituals. So let's not go there. Look at things in the context. What about Revelation? Revelation 1:5. The King James reads, and from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness and the first begotten of the dead and the prince of the kings of the earth, unto him that loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood. See, there it is. Problem is that Greek word in is by. You see what I mean, guys? We got to be careful with how we're translating things and looking at things. We got to understand context. We got to understand how things were written. We got to understand who it was written to and what's being said. Revelation 7:14 also says, "And unto him I said, Sir, you know." And he said, "These are they which came out of the great tribulation, have washed their robes and made them white by the blood of the Lamb." It doesn't mean that they were dipped in. It doesn't mean they were baptized in. It means they were cleansed by. Again, the cleansing, the purification, these are the things that we're looking at. So the washing with water, and the water represents the word. Ephesians 5:25. "Husbands, love your wives, even as the Messiah also loved the assembly and gave himself for it." Should I stop there and talk a little more? It's like, ladies, I didn't hear many amens from you. I mean, you guys, I need to talk to you guys. It says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as the Messiah loved the assembly and gave himself for it, that he might" what? "Sanctify and cleanse with the washing of water by the word." The water and the word, they go together. Why? "That he might present it to himself an honorable assembly, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but it should be holy and without blemish." Awesome. John 17:17 says, Yeshua's praying for his disciples, and he says, "Sanctify them through the truth." And then he says, "Your word is truth." So they're being sanctified by the word. And the word is setting his people apart. I guarantee you, you're sanctified by the word of God, it will set you apart. Hebrews 10:22 says, "Let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts," what? "Sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water." The life is in the blood, which is why I say one of the things we need to be careful of. When we get into Leviticus, which isn't far from here, guys, we're really not that far from it. When we get into Leviticus, we find out that God, we have this idea. Okay, it's like, let me back up. We have this idea. God was angry. God was upset. Something's dying. It's either you or the goat. And that's not the way it was. God did not want death. God does not desire death. He wants life. Don't you see? Haven't you read? He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. It is not death the Father desires. It is life. So the thing is, when the offerings were brought, it wasn't the death of this animal that he was desiring. It was the life of the one who brought it that he was desiring. But the problem is, man has sinned. How can we stand before a most holy God? So this was a means to be brought to the Father, brought close to him by proxy, so to speak. The life is in the blood. It goes on the altar, and it goes up in the smoke, and the Scripture says literally into the face of Yahweh. In other words, how can we say that Yeshua, our Messiah, brought us near to the Father if we don't have an example of how that works? Again, we need to learn what something is before we can start going into metaphors and similes and everything else. So, Genesis 9:4, "You should not eat the flesh with its life, because the life is the blood." Leviticus 17:11, "The life of the flesh is in the blood." If you take the blood out of the flesh, guess what? You die. There's no life there. "The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you to go on the altar to make atonement for yourselves," because it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Atonement is not made by death. Atonement is made by life. So why did Yeshua have to die? How did he provide atonement? Because he took his blood, which is the life, and took it to the most holy place in heaven, which was not made by man. Blood covenant, some things we're looking at. 1 John 1:7. "If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with" who? Each other. See, that's something we need to be reminded of. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with each other. We want to say we have fellowship with him. Okay, we do. But if we have fellowship with him, then we have fellowship with each other. And the blood of Yeshua cleanses us from all sin. Again, notice, cleanse, purification, being made clean. Smearing blood on persons, you're only going to find a few places where that is. This is not an exhaustive list, but you're not going to find too many places where that was given. And even when it was given, it wasn't like a whole body thing. Because in Leviticus 8, we find the priesthood, and then in Leviticus 14, we find the cleansing of a person who was a leper, which we know the high priest couldn't cleanse a leper. He could just pronounce if he was clean or unclean. So who cleansed him? See, Yahweh cleansed him. And then the priest could pronounce him clean. But then the blood and the oil was mixed together, and it was put where? On the right ear, right thumb, and the right big toe. Even that was not like a covering. Sprinkling of blood, we find a few places. Moses in Exodus, that we just read earlier, he says, this is the blood of the covenant. Various offerings throughout Leviticus. I mean, it's too much to list. Just the book. On the Day of Atonements. Again, the Day of Atonements, we think, well, atonement is to cover the sins of the people of Israel. It's it's what they count on for forgiveness. Wrong. Because it's plural, the Day of Atonements. And it says atonement will be made for the altar. Atonement will be made for the tent. Atonement will be made over the mercy seat. Did the altar sin? Did the tent sin? No, but atonement had to be made because of sin and uncleanness. Again, we'll get more of that when we get into the book of Leviticus, all right? And then the cleansing of the leper, which we just saw, there was sprinkling of blood that was involved in that as well. Sprinkling of water for purification, where do we find that? Numbers chapter 19, the ashes of the red heifer. Because the ashes of the red heifer was burned down to ash, and then it was water was ran through it, and then this water of purification would be used to make somebody clean. You want to hear something interesting? How do you make lye? L-Y-E. One of the ways they make it is to strain water through ash. And it cleanses. It's a cleaner. Matter of fact, it's caustic. It'll get you so clean, it'll burn you. You ever have water feel like fire? Again, we see some things in the natural that God already knew. You know? Exodus 31:6. It says, I have also appointed as his assistant Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, the tribe of Dan. Moreover, I have endowed all the craftsmen with the wisdom to make everything I have ordered. Okay, jumping forward here and not really getting really deep into this, but here's a few things. He appointed as the assistant Aholiab. Whose assistant? Bezalel. Bezalel was the one who was the foreman of this job. Okay? The name Bezalel means in the shadow of God. So the one who was over and overseeing the building of this Mishkan, this tent, was the one who dwelled in his shadow. Now, think about this for a minute. Traditional documents state that Bezalel was 13 when he was appointed to be foreman over this task. Can you imagine, guys, you're getting ready to start a construction job and it's a big deal, like on a national level, big deal. And they come in and says, and this is your foreman, and he's 13. Think about it. How would you respond to this kid? Son, I was doing this job before you was even born. Right? Man, I could say that. Wow. I'm getting old, y'all. So, how would we receive these things? And understand, God says, I have chosen him and I have put my spirit in him. And then I have given all those that he has come to work with him skill, craftsmen, with all their wisdom, according to everything as I have ordered. He gave them wisdom. Guys, there's a difference between skill and wisdom here. Skill means I know how to use a saw. Wisdom is knowing how to use it in a way that benefits the job. So, this is what we're looking at. This is one more testimony of saying how God is in this. He chose the things we consider foolish to confound the wise. What better way to testify of Him than to take someone who doesn't know the job and they do it perfectly? Here's more. We have two tribes represented in the leadership of building the Mishkan, Judah and Dan. In the marching formation, Judah was the first to go forward. Dan was the last. In other words, all tribes are being represented in this building project. Because this is more than a building project. This is preparing our hearts and preparing a place for Yahweh to be in our midst. And isn't that what we're supposed to do today? To prepare our hearts so that He will dwell with us? And you guys know we've talked about that before. When it says that I may dwell among them, literally it means within. So that I may dwell within them. And that's what He desires today. All right. So what's in the name? Let's look at a couple things. It says, I have singled out Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehudah, as his assistant Aholiab, the son of Ahishamach, of the tribe of Dan. So what do these names mean? If you take the meanings of their names, it has a little more story into the tabernacle. It kind of shows a little more about what's being revealed here. In the shadow of God is the son of fire, or light. He is with white linen, the praise of God. And as his assistant in the tent of his father is the brother of support to judge or rule. Shadows of the Messiah, shadows of the Ruach HaKodesh with his people, and all showing the heart of the Father. Your role in it all. Stand in his shadow. Learn from him. Change into what he desires. Exodus 34:12. Be careful not to make a covenant with the people living in the land where you are going, so that they won't become a snare within your own borders. Okay, I won't get into politics. Verse 13. Rather, you are to demolish their altars, smash their standing stones, and cut down their sacred poles, because you are not to bow down to any other god, since Adonai, whose very name is jealous, is a jealous God. You know, the word zealous and jealous is the same word in Hebrew. It's kana. But he says, when you go into the land that I am giving you, it is your land and the covenant that we have. Don't allow these things of idolatry to stand in your midst. Because if you allow idolatry in your midst to say, oh, they're not hurting anybody, they just want to do that, it will be a snare to you. Moving on. You are not to bow down to any other god. In the Torah scrolls, this Hebrew word is written with an anomaly. It's written with one of the letters larger and lower than the rest, kind of represented by what you see in the screen. It's Aleph, Chet, Resh. And the word is Acher. It translates as other, or hinder, or behind, or strange. So you are not to bow down to any strange god. You are not to bow down to any other god, right? So here's some more food for thought. The Resh is representative of the head. The Resh was made large to draw your attention, and it was lowered to say you are not to bow your head. So it's actually showing a picture of this. And it's there to catch our attention when you're reading it in the Torah scrolls, so that we go, okay, he really means this. And there's more. Your adversary is a counterfeit. And he desires to distract you and to get you in a place to where we don't discern. Your God is called Echad. Echad is one, but it's not just like the number one. It means a unified one. The Shema, Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. We said it earlier. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. It says, and in that day, his name shall be one. The Lord shall be one, and his name shall be one. One. Now, do you notice a similarity with other gods? Acher? Other gods? The only thing that's different is that last letter. And that last letter, the Dalet and the Resh, don't they look very similar to each other? In every good lie, there's just enough truth. Your adversary is a liar. Matter of fact, Hasatan, that's a Hebrew word, guys. And it means accuser. He's making accusations against you. And he's a liar. You are called one, and you are to have no part with other gods. The adversary will always try to counterfeit what the Father desires. Exodus 34:33. So once Moshe finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when he went before Adonai for him to speak, he would take the veil off until he came out. Then when he came out, he would tell the people of Israel what he had been ordered. But when the people of Israel saw Moshe's face, that the skin of Moshe's face shone, he would put the veil back over his face until he went in again to speak with Adonai. You know what's interesting about this? I'm really not going to get into that. But have you ever seen the statues and the paintings and the different things where Moses had horns? If you look at a lot of like the really, really old artwork and statues, this is Moses and he has horns. What is that? It's a mistranslation of this verse. Because where it says the skin of his face shone, the word that's in there, there's another word in there that is translated in the Septuagint. It can be translated like horns or even like rays of light, but they translate it sometimes as horns. Interesting how, like I said, translation matters, right? Things we're looking at. 2 Corinthians 3:14. What is more, their minds were made stone-like, for to this day a veil remains over them. So when they read the Old Covenant, it has not been unveiled, because in the Messiah, the what? I want to pay attention to this. In the Messiah, what is taken away? The veil. It does not say that in the Messiah, he changed his mind. It does not say that in the Messiah, well, the plan I had for the Jews fell through, let's come up with something else. His word does not change. He does not change. What changed is, like it says in Jeremiah, that the word, the covenant that he is giving his people in that day is the word that they have been given will be written on their heart. So it's not the word that changes, it's you that changes. Because it is the word, the veil that's coming off the heart. You now see the word the way it was intended to be walked and lived. And you now have the ability to walk in it. Like Ezekiel says, Ezekiel chapter 11, among others, says that I will put my spirit in you to equip you to walk in my word. He did not say I will put my spirit in you to equip you to walk contrary to my word. If he equips us by his Holy Spirit, that means he's equipping us to do what he said, not to change what he said. Verse 17. So Adonai in the text means spirit, and where the spirit of Adonai is, there is freedom. So all of us with faces unveiled. We see as in a mirror. Mirror? Where did we talk about mirrors today? The glory of the Lord. And we are being changed. We are being washed. We are being cleansed. We are being changed into his very image from one degree of glory to the next by Adonai the Spirit. Amen.